What if I told you that one man almost changed the entire history of the UFC, and he wasn't a striker, a karate master, or a jiu-jitsu specialist? He was a wrestler. And not just any wrestler. His name was Dan Severn, better known as the Beast. Before we get into his incredible UFC journey, I want you to think about something. Today, every MMA fan understands how important wrestling is. Almost every champion has strong wrestling skills. But back in 1994, things were very different. Most people believed the most dangerous fighters came from traditional martial arts. Karate, kickboxing, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Wrestling? Many fans viewed it as an Olympic sport, not something that could dominate in a real fight. Then Dan Severn arrived and forced everyone to rethink everything. Ironically, UFC executives weren't even excited about bringing him in. According to Severn himself, when he first contacted the UFC, officials questioned whether wrestling was even a martial art. They weren't convinced audiences would care about a wrestler competing against traditional fighters. But Severn believed otherwise. And he wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. Long before entering the UFC, Dan Severn had already built an impressive athletic career. As a teenager, he was considered one of the best wrestlers in the country. By the age of 17, he was already competing at an elite level and attracting attention for his incredible ability on the mat. His dream was simple: become one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. But life had other plans. A devastating knee injury threatened to end everything. Today, athletes can recover from injuries that once ended careers. But in the 1980s, medical treatments weren't nearly as advanced. For many competitors, a serious injury meant the end. Fortunately for fight fans, Severn found another path. And eventually, that path led him to the UFC. When UFC 4 took place in 1994, mixed martial arts didn't really exist as we know it today. There were almost no rules. No weight classes. No carefully designed matchmaking. The entire concept was simple. Take fighters from different styles and find out which one works best. It was raw. It was chaotic. And it was fascinating. Dan Severn's first UFC opponent was Anthony Macias. Macias was no pushover. He had striking experience and wrestling knowledge of his own. Many fans expected him to test the newcomer. Instead, they witnessed a lesson in domination. The moment Severn closed the distance, the fight completely changed. Macias suddenly found himself dealing with a wrestler who seemed physically stronger than everyone else in the tournament. Then came the suplexes. Massive. Violent. Unforgettable. Every time Severn launched his opponent through the air, the crowd reacted louder. And here's something interesting. Years later, Severn admitted that some of those throws were intentional from an entertainment standpoint. He understood that first impressions matter. He wanted people to remember him. Mission accomplished. Even decades later, fans still talk about those suplexes. But that was only the beginning. His next challenge was Marcus Bossett. A karate black belt. A tough athlete. A dangerous opponent. Bossett actually landed some solid strikes early. For a brief moment, it looked like Severn might have trouble. Then the wrestler did what wrestlers do. He closed the distance. Got the fight to the ground. And took complete control. A short time later, Bossett was forced to submit. Just like that, Dan Severn advanced to the finals. But waiting for him was the biggest name in the sport. Royce Gracie. If you're new to MMA, it's difficult to explain just how important Royce was during that era. He wasn't the biggest fighter. He wasn't the strongest fighter. Yet he kept defeating larger opponents through technique and patience. To many people, Royce Gracie seemed unbeatable. So when Dan Severn stepped into the cage against him, fans knew they were watching something special. This wasn't merely a fight. It was a battle between two systems. Two philosophies. Two visions of what combat should be. For much of the fight, Severn appeared to be winning. He controlled positions. Controlled movement. Controlled the pace. In fact, many viewers believed Gracie was running out of answers. But great champions only need one opportunity. After more than 15 grueling minutes, Gracie found it. A triangle choke. Suddenly, the impossible happened. Dan Severn tapped. The arena exploded. To this day, it remains one of the most important moments in MMA history. But here's a question for you. If that fight happened under modern MMA rules, who wins? Royce Gracie or Dan Severn? Let me know what you think. Many fighters would have allowed that defeat to define them. Severn didn't. Instead, he became even more dangerous. Just a few months later, he returned to competition with a renewed focus. His goal wasn't simply to win. His goal was to prove that he belonged at the top. And that's exactly what he did. One by one, opponents fell. Joe Charles, Dave Benito, and many others. Each victory strengthened Severn's reputation. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to become a celebrity. He simply wanted to dominate. And that's exactly what happened. Soon, he captured UFC Championship gold. The wrestler that many people originally dismissed had become one of the biggest stars in the sport. But perhaps one of the most fascinating rivalries of his career involved a man known as the Russian Bear, Oleg Taktarov. Unlike many of Severn's previous opponents, Taktarov refused to break. Their fights were exhausting wars of attrition. The kind of battles that tested not only skill but heart. Again and again, Severn imposed his wrestling. Again and again, Taktarov found ways to survive. Watching them compete felt like watching two tanks collide. Neither man wanted to give an inch. Their rivalry helped define the early years of the UFC and remains beloved by hardcore fans. Then came another dangerous challenge. Tank Abbott. Now if you've never heard of Tank Abbott, imagine one of the most intimidating fighters you've ever seen. Huge power. Massive confidence. And absolutely no fear. Many opponents looked defeated before the fight even started. But Dan Severn wasn't intimidated. Not even slightly. Instead of backing away from Abbott's aggression, Severn systematically dismantled him. He controlled him. Outworked him. Outclassed him. And showed the world that technique can overcome raw power. It was another statement victory. Another reminder that wrestling was changing the sport forever. Today, when we watch champions like Khabib Nurmagomedov, Georges St. Pierre, Islam Makhachev, or countless others use wrestling to dominate opponents, it feels normal. But someone had to help build that foundation. Someone had to prove wrestling could work against elite martial artists. Dan Severn was one of those pioneers. His record, championships, and accomplishments speak for themselves. But his true legacy goes beyond wins and losses. He helped transform the way fighters think, the way coaches train, and the way fans understand combat sports. Because before Dan Severn, wrestling was often underestimated. After Dan Severn, nobody underestimated it again. He may never have been the biggest superstar in UFC history. He may never have received the same attention as some of his rivals. But make no mistake, Dan Severn changed MMA forever. And that's why, more than 30 years later, fans still remember the man they called the Beast. So here's my final question. Does Dan Severn deserve a place among the greatest pioneers in UFC history, or is he still one of the most underrated legends the sport has ever seen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more legendary MMA stories.